Okay, that's the wonderful Ani Zonneveld behind me there, folks. Hey, Ani, welcome to the TikTok Take. It's my new live stream and podcast, and really, really excited for you to come on and be part of this. I think the world of the work that you're doing, and I think it just couldn't be more important than what's going on right now. I mean, the situation in our politics in the United States and the state of faith in the United States, I think is just something that your commentary as the founder and the leader of Muslims for Progressive Values, and also your work as an imam, and I know you don't always want to call yourself a full formally functioning imam, but your
A
role in
reluctant imam.
a relucted imam. In fact, I like to tell people that you're my imam, so I don't know if we get to do that, but
Aww.
you are my imam.
That's
Um,
awesome.
And because you do work in so many areas and big issues in the world, but also you do such good work at a local level and talking with people in the situations that people live their real lives. And so, can you just give people who don't have the privilege yet of knowing all the good things that you do? Can you describe a bit about some of the work that you do and with Muslims for Progressive Values, the organization, and also the work that you do in your community and the music work that you do? Can you brag on yourself for a couple of minutes?
I will try. So, Muslims for Progressive Values is a grassroots, faith based human rights organization that embodies the traditional Quranic values of human rights and social justice for everyone in the 21st century. So, um, to put that in terms of real activism that you can wrap your head around, and that would be challenging Muslim majority countries on their human rights abuses when they substantiated or when they justified in the name of Sharia law. And we will go in there and we'll tear it down point by point and offer a counter narrative. Well, child marriage cannot be an Islamic law or God's law because it contradicts that marriage in the Quran is between two consenting adults of sound mind.
Hmm.
So that's just one example. And on a grassroots level, when people, LGBT Muslims, are suffering as a depression as a result of demonization by members of their family or their communities, we provide them moral support. We give them religious sanction love, right?
Yeah.
In order, because that, if you're a Muslim, you identify yourself as Muslim, and then all these people around you just, no, you cannot be gay and Muslim, and you're going to hell, and. I mean, it becomes very demoralizing.
Hmm.
It becomes very depressing for a lot of LGBT Muslims. And so the mere fact that we're doing our work of self-empowerment from the language of faith
Hmm.
speaks volumes. And I've seen people lift up from their depression as a result of that,
Hmm.
as a result of having community that is affirming of your identity, right? And we all need that. So those are some example. That's an American example. There's a global example, and then on the ground in the Muslim world would be um, working with imams that are affirming of women and girls' rights, challenging the status quo, the misogynistic interpretation, challenging that girls cannot go to school or that women are not allowed to work outside the home.
And all of
Um,
those are issues that you suggest are not at all what it roots to be a Muslim. Those are cultural interpretations or communal interpretations that are used in that way.
those are all bastardized versions of Islam that has nothing to do with the Quran, but everything to do with culture that the
Hmm.
Quran was revealed to do away with. But 1400 years later, women in the Muslim world are still fighting for their rights, their God-given rights.
And tell us a little bit
That's
about the work that you do on the local level, because these things are not only big national, international issues for you. They're also
Yeah, no,
personal work.
absolutely. Yeah, I mean, even for example, here in the United States, why I became an activist was actually really quite simple. I am here in the United States. I put on Islamic pop CD, and then all of a sudden, coming to the realization, oops, I didn't realize a female Muslim voice was actually taboo. That it was actually sexual, and somehow it needs to be censored, like the rest of our body, our skin, our hair. And at that point, I said, to hell with this. I'm not going to put up with this because that's not the Islam I was raised on
Mm.
in the Muslim world. And here I am in the United States, having to, having this thrown at you. And so here, even here in the United States, women are going through, Muslim women within our, as minorities, living in minority communities are having to deal with this issue. Um, but it's this whole sexualization of a woman's body. We saw that through the election
Yeah,
process.
boy. Yeah.
There's really no difference between these Muslim communities that want Muslim women bodies and voices and everything to be covered because we are such sexual objects, and that's one extreme. And then the other extreme is the sexualization of a woman's body for the purpose of selling a product.
Right.
Look at some of the burger commercials.
Yeah.
It's like,
or winning a
holy
beauty
cow.
contest. Yeah.
Yeah. And then you have Trump saying what he said. And so.
Ani, I've thought about you so often over these last 3 months, listening to the heightened fear and rhetoric about Muslims and about the expression of faith that for Donald Trump and for so many people who are rallied to his cause, that they not only weren't being careful about separating an extremist from a person's faith or trying to even separate out the culture from someone's faith, but they were almost proud of the fact that they would put together being a Muslim person with a whole expression of that as they've characterized it and caricatured it in the media. And one of the things I've thought about with you is you are also fighting against that very same work that seems to happen inside of Islamic communities, right? Where someone says, well, if you're a Muslim, then it comes with all of this cultural expression. And I wondered about your thoughts on that, how similar you saw the kind of generalization and then demonization that was going on in the Trump world with the kind of generalization and righteousness approach that happens when people combine a religious expression with a cultural expression and can't separate those two. Do you know what I'm getting at?
No, absolutely. It really boils down to the way Muslims have been portrayed in the media since 9/11. If what you see in the media is consistently that a Muslim woman is almost always is represented by a scarf wearing Muslim, then, I mean, as a progressive Muslim, when I go out to speak, so, oh, how come you're not wearing a headscarf? Like, excuse me, it doesn't say I have to. But non-Muslims even have internalized this idea that if you're a Muslim woman, you have to wear a headscarf or you have to dress a certain way. And there's no such mandate. But the fact is that is how the mainstream media in particular have been framing what a Muslim looks and sounds like. And then you've got the headlines that is rife with all the radical and murders and terrorist attacks, supposedly in the name of Islam. And so there really isn't that hardly any space for voices, progressive and alternative Muslim voices to surface. And sadly, progressive Muslim voices and LGBT Muslim voices actually were sought out after the murder in Florida. And all of a sudden, we were inundated with requests for where are the progressive Muslim voices, where are the LGBT Muslims? And so when you Google progressive LGBT Muslims, Muslims for Progressive Values would pop up. And so we were fielding a lot of media requests as a result of that incident, right? And then that's one point. The second point too is that there has been a statistics for many years that's been published, but that's been really buried, and that is 37% of Americans, non-Muslim Americans, actually believe that Muslims need to carry an identity card or wear a badge.
Really?
37%, yes. So what Trump did basically tap into that sentiment. He made those numbers come alive. That's all he did. And it was very strategic, and it really worked for him. So those numbers coupled with the mainstream perception of what a Muslim is and isn't, it was just like the perfect storm for the demonization of all Muslims.
Yeah, and really, I mean, I bet you feel the same way that what we're seeing is not just that these issues in Trump's world were created, but that he gave voice to or raised the awareness that these things were happening, right?
Yeah.
Does that scare you even more as a Muslim in the United States, or are you like, look, everybody else, you're just catching up to what we've all known all along? You know, you've been more sensitive to these issues because a lot of us were like, I cannot believe so many people in this country thought that way and support, and were not either repulsed by those ideas or supported those ideas. And I'm wondering, did you feel like, oh no, we've always known that that's been going on, and it's no
Yeah,
news to
no,
us?
no, absolutely. Every election cycle, Muslims are being hung out to dry.
Hmm.
A lot of them have been by the Republican Party, unfortunately. And this has been going on for many years since the Obama's first run for presidency. Um, yes, I think the good thing about what's happened now is that it's really it is no longer a hidden agenda. It is very it now scares the rest of the American population of
Hmm.
where some of the mindsets of some of our fellow Americans are at. And I think the seriousness of it cannot be dismissed.
Hmm.
I have to say, during this election cycle, even we progressive Muslims have been threatened with gun-toting, Trump supporters. So I'm more concerned about them than I am about radical Muslims,
Hmm.
actually.
Really? How do you mean? What's more concerning for you about that?
Well, they have been empowered,
Hmm.
um, and I don't think the Homeland Security and FBI really tracks um, the radical gun-toting fringe,
Hmm.
non-Muslim fringe, as much or as well as they do the Muslim population.
Hmm.
Yeah, I used to say, well, the good thing about having Homeland Security tracking Muslims and those who they think are, radical is that it really, it really puts the lid on some of the radical thought and actions. And it really puts the lid on and actually protects a lot of us Muslims who are actually doing the hard lifting and the ones who have been challenging the radical narratives. And we've been doing that for more than
Hmm.
10 years, right? But now, with all this this narrative that we've had demonizing not just Muslims but just many groups of minorities, it has unleashed this. It is emboldened. It has unleashed. It has empowered. It has enabled. It has given permission for them to act on that
Hmm.
hate. So it's no longer a speech. It's no longer that line. They have crossed the line.
Yeah. How is it that inside the progressive Muslim communities that you're connected to, how are they talking about their faith in the 20th, or 2016 and 17 and going forward? What's the heartbeat of it? Is it passion? Is it fear? How's it going?
I think it's anger. It's really. I know for myself personally, I felt really betrayed by my fellow Americans.
Yeah.
That how could they vote for a man? Frankly, personally, I don't think Trump believes half the stuff he was campaigning on, or the demonization and
Mm.
a lot of the things he said. I
Mm.
actually don't believe he himself believed it.
Yeah.
But however, those who have been following and those who have voted for him do believe he was expressing his honest views. Um, and so I think for many of us, the I think even for myself, I am more concerned about safety than I've ever been. We are very disappointed and felt very betrayed by our fellow Americans who felt that their pocketbooks was more important than the well-being of the rest of America and the safety of everyone. Um, they didn't think it was a serious issue. I
Mm-hmm.
do hope that they have reconsidered that now.
Mm-hmm.
Um, as far as faith, I think I'm. It hasn't. It hasn't. It hasn't moved me in one way or the other. I'm still on the same path and as passionate as I've ever been. Um, but it has made our work a lot more difficult to counter the radical narratives within the Muslim community when we have to also battle the radicals outside the Muslim community.
Yeah.
As if the work is not tough enough. Now we've got to really be careful. Like, how do we criticize the radicalism within our Muslim community when we're also being attacked, more so doubling down against us by those outside of the Muslim community? So that makes our work much, much tougher.
So many of the issues within religion also play out in interreligious fights. I can imagine that under this kind of pressure, that's even greater inside the Islamic communities. Is that true? That there's real fear of each other, or real blaming of one another? Is that happening more inside the community now than it was previously?
No, I don't get that at all. Not at all. Not within and not even interfaith. Here in Los Angeles, for example, there's been a real strong solidarity
Oh, good.
of interfaith movements, of coming together. There is, for example, this I Am America, hashtag I Am America initiative that brought together interfaith communities in various cities. So we had a huge event in collaboration with many other faith organizations. And then this afternoon, later on, I'm actually going to be co-writing a song with a group of other faith and non-faith atheists on I Am America. And
is it going to be the new "We Are the World" kind of thing? Is it?
Yeah,
Are you going to be? Are you
yeah.
going to be Cyndi Lauper in that piece? Are you going to be
No.
the
I
famous
don't know what
one
I'm
that
gonna
pops
be.
out of it?
But yeah, so it's going to be powerful. That it's going to be, and it's going to show the America that I love. It's going to show the side of America that what America really is about. So unfortunately, this hate stuff has trumped the good that's in our country, and unfortunately, when the results. When the election results was being announced,
Oh,
I was in Indonesia
you were.
at an anti-radicalism conference. I had submitted my vote in by mail, and so here I am in Indonesia, and it was a United Nations conference on anti-radicalism with all these Southeast Asian governments, and we were all glued onto our phones looking at the results, and we were floored, aghast at the results, and the UN people were just shocked, right? How could I mean, the United Nations in the room that I was in, these are people that advocate for human rights.
Yeah.
And America is supposed to be this moral, torch for human rights. And I do still believe in that. It's just unfortunate that all of the positive qualities about America, of justice for all, got trumped in such a bad way that day on election day, and we're still fighting that. Look at the, the conflict that's happening with the Native Americans and the pipelines. I mean, we're still having those fights on a daily basis, and as a Muslim organization that fights against much of the radicalism in the Muslim world and also in the Muslim communities in the West, to have to fight the broader fight is just daunting and exhausting.
There's all this talk in the media and so on about some kind of a re-established version of a registry of people from certain countries. That thing that apparently was in place from 2001 through 2010. That function, that knowing where certain people are from certain regions of the world, which is another way to do a Muslim registry. Is your community worried about that? Are you talking a lot about that particular fear? And is there something that you would like for people who are of other faith traditions to do or be engaged in around that particular issue? Because it really seems like that could come to the forefront rather quickly.
It's not a new concept. It's been done. The only difference is that they're broadening it, and the difference too is that they are actually looking at having American Muslims register, Muslims here in America register
Hmm.
who are citizens. And so my name is Ani Zonneveld, and I'm not really sure. Yeah, okay, so it's obvious I'm Muslim because I'm the founder and president of Muslims for Progressive Values, so I'm out of the closet in a big way.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of Muslims in America who don't have Muslim names. And so, how are you actually going to know if someone is Muslim or not? Number one.
Well, Jeb
And
Bush said you just ask them. Do you remember that in the campaign? He goes, ask them. They have to tell the truth. Great answer.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But,
Just ask
I
everybody.
think, what I would say is that I would ask our non Muslim friends to sign on just to mess with the system. Because
Everyone
that's the
Everyone who wants to registers
everyone
as a Muslim
registers.
and get on the list.
Yeah. Um, and but before we get to that, I do think that the ACLUs and all of these
Yes.
civil societies are just going to put up a really big fight. But the fact of the matter is, it has been a system in place, and so they were not able to
Yeah.
to they were not able to fight that system. So
Yeah, in fact, until it
so,
came up around, and this time, I didn't even know that there was something like that in place that
yes,
came out of the September 11th
yeah,
response, and that
and
for
it was
even 2 years
it,
into the Obama administration, it was
yeah.
happening. Am I right about that?
I'm not sure when it got dismantled, but I know that um, it was for men from a certain age, to 18 to 35, and from a certain region, geographic region. Um, if you're a resident of America, if you were in America of that particular country and region, you had to register. And if you didn't, you would be deported. And so a lot of Muslim men were deported at that time.
Because they chose not to register, or they didn't know.
No, they because they chose not to register, or they registered and they were their status was off, or what have you.
Hmm. I
Yeah,
mean, there's an entire immigration question and deportation question that goes on with people from Mexico and Central America, and
yeah.
but it's also a big issue with people from with Muslims from predominantly Muslim countries, isn't it? Do you feel like that's a targeting of Muslim faith in a way, or do you think
Oh,
they're using
absolutely.
the
No,
immigration?
absolutely.
Really?
No, absolutely. And what's really heartening for me is that even the CEO of ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, it's a Jewish organization, has publicly disclosed that once and if the registration comes into place, that he will be the first to he'll be registering himself as well, because this is for the Jewish community. I know I have plenty of Jewish friends and rabbis, especially the head of the Jewish Reform Temple, Rabbi Denise Egger. They've made a statement,
Hmm.
published statement saying that this is unthinkable that America should be thinking about registering or singling a faith tradition, a religion. We've experienced this during the Nazi Germany. We will not stand for this. So, we have very strong allies, and I'm really happy to see that this idea of a registry has actually brought together real Orthodox
Mm.
communities, ISNA, the Muslim umbrella organization, with ADL and others, to collaborate, to fight this registry. Yeah.
Yeah. Are you seeing any kind of work um, within the particular faith traditions that do you see them those that have been more culturally bound or conservative starting to become more open or more progressive? Is that happening? Are you sensing that among
Yeah.
the mosques and all?
Oh, you're good, Doug. Yeah, all of a sudden we're getting people that are eagerly wanting to identify themselves as progressive. And I remember when we started more than 10 years ago, it's like, why are you calling yourself progressive? And we're all being demonized for calling
Yeah.
ourselves progressive. But yeah, people are shifting, and I think through the years they've had to reassess their values,
Hmm.
and they've had to reassess, well, what kind of Muslim am I, and when MPV has always been throwing up that mirror up to the Muslim community. So, well, how can you say you're for Muslim rights when you're demonizing LGBT people and you're demonizing this minority and that minority? Why should anyone care about Muslim rights, right?
Yeah.
Clean up your act. So now
Do,
they're forced to, yeah.
and do you feel like the current political situation will have a role to play in that action that's happening with people? Do you think it'll cause more to consider the role of their faith and how they're viewing it?
Yes,
Because I could see
absolutely.
it
And
sort
I
of
think,
going both ways. I could sort of imagine
yeah,
it being a cloistering effect and a real kind of conservative pushback and protection narrative also coming out. I wonder if you have a sense of it going one way or the other.
I think it's a little bit of both. Although I think the majority have been more of an enlightened um, coming out uh,
Mm.
approach. I can imagine the younger folks will not take that route. I can imagine the younger folks will take a radical route. So that's something that we in the Muslim community have to brace
Mm.
ourselves. That there are going to be some young folks who are just going to be, who are traumatized, who are really pushed up against the corner more than they already have been. And it's unfortunate because, I hate to say this, but I've been saying this about Europe, and I
Mm.
said that if America doesn't watch it, America's going to follow the same route as Europe. And sure enough, we're just falling into the steps of what Europe has done to its Muslim minorities. They have not
Mm.
given them due rights in many instances. Um, and that's why, Europe, the Muslim youth in Europe are much more radicalized than in America. We don't have those issues. We didn't have those issues, but we are definitely going to have them now.
It's so interesting to hear you say that because in the Christian tradition and world of people in the United States talking about the role of faith in the United States compared to Europe, it's always talked about, or most often talked about in such different terms. Like, in Europe, they've become totally post religious, and in Europe, there's no expression of faith. And that's what's going to happen in the US. We're going to become super enlightened here and are going to be freed from the bonds and the bondages of religious expression and being the thing that kind of gets in the way and gets in the trouble. And then to hear you say that, boy, and so a lot of Christians have been saying we need to really be careful so that we don't end up with this kind of atheist-like, open, free-minded kind of Europe where Christianity doesn't have a role anymore. And to hear you say, if we're not careful, we're going to end up like Europe, where there's a kind of bigotry against religion and where Muslims are excluded in a way, and they don't have access to the fullness of the human rights. And that's just such an interesting counter conversation to what so many of us in the Christian world talk about.
I think will not. America is much more spiritual and faith based than Europe
Hmm.
is. And I don't think America will become as anti religion as Europe, especially the Northern Europeans, have become. I doubt that. I think Americans actually, for the most part, have a very large we have a very healthy take on religion and the way we practice our faith traditions. We're much more spiritual. We're much more open and easy. So yeah, come and pray in your church. You come and pray in my synagogue, and it's easy. It's not as tribal.
Mm-hmm.
In some of the European states, the atheists are so tribal and so anti-religion, in a very unhealthy way,
Mm.
that it really isolates people of faith,
Mm.
and they demonize people of faith. So it's strange.
It was interesting to hear you talk about the younger people that you know and that you're thinking about. In Minneapolis, where I am, the primary expression of of Islam comes through the Somalian communities and the different groups and some others from East Africa, but there's a large Somali population, and it's really interesting to see the second and third generation Somalian teenagers starting to shed some of the cultural expressions of their heritage, right? And I've wondered a lot about what their faith expression will be like, how they could stay faithful to their Muslim commitment and to their Islamic faith expression while shedding the cultural pieces. Do you see exciting things happening among teenagers and people in their 20s where they're navigating that leaving behind of some of the cultural heritage stuff and keeping their faith alive?
Yeah, so that's the core essence of what Muslims for Progressive Values is about. It's not about what culture you come from and how you express that culture of Islam. It actually boils it down to just values and what the Quran actually advocates for, and that's social justice, egalitarianism, equality, human rights, and all that good stuff. And so, but all that good stuff got buried with all this cultural flavors. So when you're talking about the younger generation stripping that off, what is really important that they really need to rediscover the values of Islam, and what they really need to discover in order for them. And this is the part that we have to be very careful about, because yes, they may share their cultural identities, but it is their cultural identities that have kept them rooted, that have kept them away from radicalism. And so when they start shedding that cultural identity expressions, what sort of Islam will they be going to, right? So this is the part where in Europe they have missed the boat. This is the part in Europe where it says, well, you can either be Muslim the way your parents are or not, because you can't be Muslim and European, right? And so what we're saying that, no, you can be Muslim and American, you can be Muslim and European, because as a matter of fact, a lot of the European countries are more Sharia compliant than Muslim countries are, because they take care of the environment, they have health care for everyone. It's a society that cares for its people. It's a society where you're represented in government, right? That's as Islamic as it comes. You have representation.
That is so fun to hear you say that, because as you know, most people that they're the thing they've heard about Islam tends not to be those attributes that you're advocating for.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The Western society, particularly the Northern Scandinavian countries, who are the most anti-religion, they are actually the most Sharia compliant. Okay. They are for human rights. They protect everyone. They take care of the disability, and you know, and the animals. You know, they are. And the Muslim world are the worst. They're
Oh, isn't that
Saudi
funny?
Arabia. So, so, so this is where we have to be very careful about. Okay, that's great that they're becoming more Americanized, or not great, whatever, however you see it. But however, at the bottom of it, what is it they're going to hang their identity on? And we have to be very careful. They have to be able to switch to a Muslim identity that is American and yet Islam.
And in the world that I come from, there's a lot of work that has to be done to form some kind of a community that you're involved in that way, because it's very hard for an individual to find their way into faith when for any one of us to separate out what is the cultural demand versus the expression of your faith that doesn't require that cultural experience. It's a really hard thing to do. So there's a lot of work that happens with campus groups or with online communities or churches that get formed of people who are expressing faith in that way. And it's a lot of us believe that it's really important that there is a people somewhere that are supported in a local way as well as a national way. And so there's a big history, in Christianity in North America of that popping up, of these expressions, Christian youth expressions. Are you seeing that with Muslim youth as well? Are there new expressions of what that means? Do you see those happening?
They are not, the youth are not very good about creating a spiritual American expression. So, but we've been doing that. I mean, I have personally taken that's been sort of a personal journey for myself, because as an immigrant to the United States, where's the American expression of Islam?
Yeah.
I don't want a Saudi, I don't want a Sunni, I don't want a Shia, I don't want I just want an egalitarian American Islam. I have the right to have that. And so I've created, for example, music, worship songs
Yeah.
in English in the classical genre. And so that is our way of creating an American Islam spiritual expression. Or we, as a policy MPV, we officiate interfaith marriages between Muslim women and non-Muslim men.
Wow.
Because the traditional mosques won't do it because they're very orthodox, and yet the Quran says
And
nothing
the churches
about,
aren't going to do it.
no, yeah, Catholic Church won't do it for sure.
Yeah.
So, so we've got, so we do those sort of marriages. So now we've got this plethora of Muslim women, who are educated professionals and marrying non-Muslim men. Where do their children go to?
Wow.
Right? I mean, this is an issue. This is an issue that the traditional, I shouldn't say traditional, that the dominant mosques have not addressed, because as far as they are concerned, there's no homosexuality in the Muslim community. Muslim women don't marry non-Muslim men. Just this total denial, right?
Oh,
It's like
yeah.
the fact that people are leaving the mosque. So, so that's another nuanced cultural shift that's happening in Muslim societies in America.
And just for people who don't happen to know, most mosques, or maybe all mosques, are not run by professionals the way that, say, a rabbi would be of a synagogue, or that a clergy person would be in a Christian church. They're all non-professional or lay-led. And so the structure is really different for, like, paying attention or keeping up on the members or knowing kind of what's going on. Is that part of the reason that people who feel excluded from the life of the mosque and of Muslim expression of life, they can drift away, and there's not really an apparatus to follow up on them in a database and see if they were at weekly prayer?
No, they yeah, you gotta give your 2%, right?
Yeah, you gotta sign that card. Churches and synagogues, they make you sign in when you're sitting there in the little pew.
Synagogues is so well organized when it comes to that.
But that's a big deal, isn't it? Inside, I mean, the difference in the mosques that they and also tend to be organized inside of cultural expressions in a way that some of us might recognize, the way that churches 50 or 100 years ago would have been an ethnic expression for Scottish people or Lutheran Germans or something like that.
So some mosques have become much more integrated in their it's done, the service is conducted in English, and because it's very multicultural in its congregation. However, a lot of the mosques are actually created by a few families that have come together and invested their savings into creating this community that benefits the rest of the community. So that has been the business structure for the most part.
Do those family members tend to be the imams as well? Do they tend to be the leaders of the mosque?
Yes. And their children, right? So,
really?
However, now that's starting to shift, because now communities are starting to live by a mosque, much like the Jewish community. The Orthodox communities have, they buy homes close to their synagogue that they can walk to. So the Muslims have started to, I can see some patterns of that happening, but then the good thing about that is that you have members of the community investing in the mosque themselves, rather than a few people, right, plunking in and therefore controlling the agenda of the mosque. Now it's more democratic in its structure, because the money's coming from the different members of the community, or more diverse members of the community. The bad thing about that is that I'm not a person that believes in self-segregation. I do think that you should be going to the public schools. You should not be going to Muslim schools, because the real world is made up of diverse. And like the Quran, there's a beautiful verse that makes me still a Muslim, and that is the verse goes, I have made you into, I being God, I have made you into created men and women and created nations and tribes for you to learn from each other and for you to not hate each other. So, if we are all supposed to be Christians, I would be a Christian. If we are all supposed to be atheists, we would all be atheists, but that's not how it's designed, because God gave us the mental capacity to think, and so therefore you have the right and the liberty to choose what have you.
Ani, that's why you're my imam. You're the best. You're the best.
I'm so honored by that.
Oh, I am. Anything more you want to tell people about what you're up to, and if they want to keep up on you, obviously they can go to Muslims for Progressive Values and find you there because you're the MPV.
Yes, I do want to share something.
Yeah, please.
So we have an event that's coming up that we're very proud of, and it's called Celebration of Life. And this is where we celebrate the human rights defenders in the Muslim world who are either tortured, jailed, or killed for expressing progressive views. And Americans need to really realize once and for all, every time we get asked by the media, so where are the progressive Muslims? Where are the moderate Muslims? Like people, we're here in America. We've been here. You've just never given us the microphone. And in the Muslim world, they're jailed, tortured, or killed. And what we do is every year we highlight a handful of them. And we do this in an artistic form. We actually invite celebrities here in America. Like last year, we invited Mayor Eric Garcetti of Los Angeles. And the most beautiful part is that these celebrities, these named people that are respected in our communities, are speaking in the first person as that artist that is jailed, tortured, or killed in the first person. So Mayor Garcetti was speaking as a Libyan human rights lawyer who was killed as Salwa Bukhaykis himself. So he was speaking as her.
Wow.
It's so powerful. So that happens, that's going to take place January 15th. And that's one way of supporting Muslims for Progressive Values. And
you mean to attend that event or to financially support it? Where? Okay, September. It's January 15th and
2017.
2017
in Los Angeles, and you can find more information on our website mpvusa.org. And the event is called Celebration of Life.
Yeah. Well, I want everyone to know about that. Try to get there myself. Ani, thanks so much for being part of this. You're really really great. Thanks.